Getting back to the question we asked, if God is perfect in the absolute sense and he needs nothing, why did he create a world? Why did he create the human being? Ramchal writes, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto writes in his work, The Way of God, God is the essence of goodness. God has no need, but good does good. What is the ultimate goodness? To create an opportunity, a setting for someone to be a beneficiary of the ultimate goodness, which is to have a relationship with God himself, which is the source of all goodness in the absolute sense. That's why God created the world with all its amenities to facilitate the objective of the human being to address every aspect of his spirituality, of his soul, to develop it and advance it, to be able to have that relationship with God himself and partake of that goodness. One's actions don't come about through happenstance. It's not coincidence, but rather it's deliberate choice, infused with intent, either less intent or more intent. The greater the intent, the positive intent, if one does it truly for the sake of God, God has greater relevance to having a relationship and being a beneficiary of that goodness, which is God himself. If one may have done the action, but it was with a self-interest, a material interest, it's really not God-related. Therefore, the level of relationship would be considered very minimal, because the action was not really driven, God-driven, but rather self-driven, for one's own self-interest. We read at the beginning of creation, God said to his heavenly retinue of angels, "Let us create man in our image and our form. B'tzalmeinu u'b'dvusenu." What does it mean, in our image and our form? Although God doesn't have to consult with anyone, the Talmud tells us the only reason why God expressed himself in this manner, let us create, it's for us to learn from God that when one is about to do something, one should even consult with lesser beings, which is an expression of humility. But of course, the creation of man, the creation of existence, had nothing to do with the angels agreeing or disagreeing whatsoever. If God is absolute in every sense of the word, God sees things with absolute clarity. There's no basis to consult, because God knows exactly what's right. And if he says, let us create, he's creating what's supposed to be created for the purpose and with the objective of his own intent. So what is the image of God? Let us create man in our image and our form. So one of the commentators explains, what is God's image? Nothing compels God to do anything other than what's right. God is not forced to do anything. God, as we say, Kaviyachol, in a certain context, has free choice. However, the word choice has no relevance to God. Choice only means if there's a certain degree of ambiguity, one has to make a choice between one and another. But if God sees everything with absolute clarity, there's no choice. He always does what's right to be done. And therefore, the Talmud tells us, as one blesses God for the good, one blesses God even for the tragedy. Kishem shevorchin al hatov, as once is the blessing of we thank God when good fortune comes upon a person, for allowing us to live and maintain us to be a beneficiary of the good, which is known as the blessing of Shechiyanu. Identically, mevorchin al hara, one acknowledges God for the tragedy, which God forbid befalls a person, because God is Dayan HaEmes. God is the true judge. Even tragedy, it is only seen in the negative because we truly don't understand its value. But in the ultimate sense, it's for the good of mankind and the human being to experience what he has, what he's enduring, and what comes upon him. For instance, what would be the equivalent situation? And this allegory is offered by some of the Kabbalistic works. A child needs radical surgery to save his life. And the surgeon cannot sedate the child. And the father is there, and the surgeon asks the father to hold his child down while he's cutting living flesh to excise a tumor that, if it would not be removed, would cause the child to die. And out of love, and as much as the father's pained when he sees his child writhing in pain, and as the surgeon is cutting that living flesh, and the child is screaming to a point of nearly fainting from pain, the father is pained by seeing his child in pain, but ultimately is happy because he understands that this will give the child a full functioning life to live as a normal human being. Identically, punishment, suffering, tragedy, mishap, setback, whatever way you want to express it, only happens because nobody's perfect. And one has to be atoned. Atonement is spiritual rehabilitation. So in the ultimate sense, it's in the best interest of man. If a bystander would see the father holding his child down and seeing the surgeon cutting the living flesh, a person would say in their life they've never seen and witnessed such cruelty, such heartlessness. How's it possible that a father should participate in torturing his own child? It's not comprehensible. It's disgraceful. It's only because the bystander doesn't understand the nature of what's taking place. And this is the only way to save the child's life and to give the child a full life to live. Identically, for a human being, for a Jew, to have relevance to eternity, which is the ultimate spiritual bliss. It's the ultimate level of reward, where we read in Ethics of Our Fathers that if you would encapsulate every level of pleasure from the beginning existence to the end of existence in one moment, it would not be the equivalent of a whiff of the world to come. The suffering, the pain, is the spiritual rehabilitation. To allow the person to be qualified that when he passes on to the eternal existence, he should be able to have full benefit of what that world is, which is the ultimate level of benefit and pleasure. We had explained that although God is perfect in the absolute sense, and God needs nothing, but because God is the essence of goodness on the absolute level, something which represents and is good does good. And what is good? What is doing good? Creating a setting where someone else can be a beneficiary of good, but not only ordinary good, but good in the absolute sense. Therefore, he created a being which has choice, free choice, to do as he chooses to do. And as a result of one's behavior, which is dictated by one's choice, whatever the choice may be, is attributed to the person himself. Because if a person's behavior will be only instinctive, the action has no relevance to the person, but rather it's the instinctive impulse which causes that action to take place. Therefore, God created the human being who's infused with a soul which represents the eternity of man. The soul is not finite relative to physicality, but rather it lives on eternally. The body, on the other hand, being made of earth as it is described in detail in the portion of Genesis, how God created man, how he formed man from the earth. And after man failed in his initial mission, God says, you were made from the earth, you will go back to the earth. And this is the decomposition of the human being. Ultimately, which in the future we will discuss, if one merits to be part of the eternal existence, when the world will reach its level of perfection, the human being will be resurrected. The soul will be reinfused in the body as it originally was. When God blew the soul of life into the being which he had created, this will happen again in the future, and that physical spiritual being will live for all eternity as this composite of the human being. It is very interesting. A great Kabbalist who lived in the 16th century, who was a colleague of the Arizal, who was the great Kabbalist. He was the greatest Kabbalist from the time of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is the author of the Zohar. He was a colleague of his, and he writes something which is so profound and so deep and so interesting. To what degree do we see God's goodness and his kindness? Before God created existence, nothing existed. There was no being who was deserving, and therefore God, based on the concept of reward and punishment, he owes it to anyone. This is a time where nothing exists. The creation of the human being is purely an expression of God's unlimited kindness, indiscriminate kindness. And God creates the human being. One's choice only has value if he could choose to do something which is contrary to the will of God. To defy God on the most extreme level. God forbid. To desecrate God. To blaspheme God. God forbid. Because without giving the human being that option of choice, the choice of the positive does not have any value. Man has to be equally balanced to do as he chooses. The ultimate good, but the ultimate evil. Although doing the evil, God has to participate in that action, because man's function in any capacity, good or evil, is facilitated by God willing the person the ability to bring about whatever he chooses to bring about. So to what degree do we see God's kindness? It's something which is not comprehensible. That God is willing to be disgraced, to be desecrated, to be blasphemed, to give the human being the ability to be the achiever, that if he chooses to do the right thing, he will be the beneficiary of the ultimate good, which is having a relationship with God himself, who's good in the absolute sense.